Hi everybody, and this is not the video that I expected to make. That is, there are elements out there in the MBTIverse that take the position that FI dominants, and INFPs in particular, are not capable of making logical, rational arguments. Therefore I thought, I will make a logical, rational argument. I'll put together a series of points and then back those, and that way showcase that, yes, in fact, an FI dominant can put together this sort of a debate piece and is capable of thinking rationally. And then based on the conclusions from that, people could either say, okay, we were wrong, an INFP is able to make a rational logical argument, or they might say, that was a terrible argument, it was not rational or logical, and therefore, yes, you are an INFP. Or they might say, that was a rational logical argument, therefore you cannot possibly be an INFP. But whatever the case, that wasn't the primary reason why I stopped from publishing what I was working on. The main reason was that the original video I made to put together the points was 25 minutes long, and I'll go into why that is in a moment. That was way more of Dulles than anyone should have to put up with, so I nixed that video and I built an abridged version where I took out a bunch of what I thought was important detail, and I got it down to 13 minutes. And after reviewing that, I decided that there was no good way to proceed that would be positive from a greater umbrella point of view. So I would be making a point, but losing the larger reasoning for putting together an argument in the first place. To let you know what I was working on, our US state is currently in an ongoing process of cannabis reform. They are putting a question on the ballot that's looking to rescind some elements of legalization and retail availability of cannabis. So I put together an argument that looked at the pros and cons and advocated for a stance that it is necessary for a number of reasons, the ones that people usually don't consider and are not part of the regular arguments, that retail availability of cannabis is best off continuing, and that curtailing the current level of legalization would be an issue. I'm not going to make those arguments because the main reason is because we've got three different potential listeners to these points. There will be people who are active advocates of cannabis consumption, legalization, retail availability, and that contingent, it's preaching to the choir. People are already in favor. It doesn't really matter what logical, rational arguments I make because they're already won over to, I had them at hello. The second group would be those that are in favor of rescinding some of the current levels of retail availability and or going all the way to full reversal of legalization. That group, there is nothing that I could say that would be considered a rational, logical argument because from those biases, I would probably be incorrect no matter what I say. Or if I were correct and seated in certain points, it still would be met with, it would have a negative reaction. And then the third group are the folks who are just plain ambivalent, who probably are not going to have the patience to sit through what I have to say. So either I'll win over people who are already won over, I'll make people mad for no reason that helps anybody, or people don't care and they'll just tune out. So instead, I had the debate about the debate, about whether to have this debate. And on that basis, it doesn't make sense for me to advocate for any particular position. We will see what will happen in November when the question to reverse some of the legal measures in our state are put to the people to vote, and after that we'll find out what happens next. So, part of what happens here as well that I wanted to get into is that as this legalization process was undergoing, as it was taking steps, and our US state legalized cannabis, including retail sales, people mistook what I was trying to do or what I was advocating for as being on their side or against their side. That was part of the reason why the whole argument initially took me 25 minutes to set up, because I recognized that each side has its own motivations, it has its own good points to make. There is good reasoning for why retail cannabis sales ought to be curtailed. And whether or not I agree with those, the reasoning is sound, the rationale is good. So before I could get into what my own positions were, I had to walk through the present primary factions, their principal viewpoints, affirm that their viewpoints are valid, and sort of walk through and try to represent in an honest way what each side was advocating for, before then saying that neither one of these are approaching the argument in a correct way. They're not looking at the stuff that's actually important. It's the same old tired arguments that we've already had over and over again, and that will just result in the same old tired outcome that we've had in the past. So that's why it was taking me so long, was to talk through all of that and then talk through my own biases, which I'm happy to come clean with. I have purchased cannabis exactly twice in my life. Once was when I was in college and I was poor, and I gave someone $5 with which to purchase cannabis, and I got this little tiny bits of powder and dregs, which I mean, it was a little absurd. I wasn't exactly into the whole scene. And then the second time was decades later, and it's a complicated situation, but I purchased and then didn't consume and passed it along to somebody else. Basically, I just was a middleman between two different people to make sure that the cannabis went from point A to point B. So whether or not that was legal, well, the statute of limitations has probably run out, so let's not be too concerned. But anyway, the main point being, I am not affected by this personally, whether or not I have a strong stance, and I want to recognize that everyone has a valid stance in this discussion. So with that, I don't need to go into what my own stance is, because people probably don't care. And then finally, the piece that I wanted to bring up in all of this is that, let me get back to one other thing. One of the troubles I had when we were going through legalization in the first place was that I was listening to all sides. And the challenge with that is that people thought that I would be swayable or easily swayed. And what I was really doing was trying to listen to all of the arguments so that I could evaluate what is the most correct position. And the main thing I was looking for is whether or not there's anything that I had not yet considered in my own evaluation. So that opened me up to all sorts of being pushed around by people that thought that they could impose their views and their position on me, which was, I mean, I don't begrudge them for trying, but I just found it difficult because it was a one-way street, that people would not listen to my positions, which were different from what was out there, yet they would expect me to listen to theirs and adjust or accept their positions as my own. So that was part of the overall frustration of the whole thing the first time around, maybe why it's best that I don't reprise that by getting into any sort of arguments this time around. So the final thought that I have with all of this is, even after saying point of frustration that people were trying to impose their will on me while not being receptive to anything I had to say, that I do believe in the goodwill of people and that people are warm. It's not a better way to say it. People mean well, and people on both sides of this issue mean well, and they're each trying to come up with their own idea of what is more important between freedoms and harm prevention and making mental health and physical health and choice and medical benefits and ancillary benefits. So there is this whole, everyone's trying to do the right thing. And that's where it's just kind of too bad that people end up at loggerheads at these sorts of issues where there is actually a commonality that we are all trying to get to a common good. But because of tribalism being what it is, we can't come to agreement that we can recognize each other's issues and perhaps come to some sort of a compromise that would work for each of the sides. That is, when I proposed a compromise during that legalization process, the response that I got was, yes, the compromise is that we're not going to permit anything, and that is a fair compromise. And the side that was against retail legalization ended up losing because of the extreme position and uncompromising position they took, which was in part required of them because of the funding that they were getting from interest groups. So the problem is that there were interest groups in favor of retail legalization. There were specific donors that were contributing to fight legalization. And so the extremes were taking up, the polls were well funded and were taking up the main drivers of the argument. So we were forced into a black and white only decision where people like myself and others were at various points in the middle and could see that there would be places where each side could be partially fulfilled in having its requests met. But that's not how it happened. So anyway, short end result to a long conversation. We have a question on the ballot to rescind legalized retail sales of cannabis in our state in November. I expect it will be resoundly defeated. You never know. But legalization was soundly enabled the first time round, and I think that revisiting those issues, as the saying goes, the cow's out of the barn or the cat's out of the bag, or pick your favorite saying, you can't put toothpaste back in the tube. However it goes, I think that the people that would like to reverse what has taken place so far would have a difficult road ahead. So anyway, all I've got to say, I'm much more comfortable talking about the debate that I'm not publishing than to publish the debate points that I have made. And I hope it's helpful in some way. And thanks for your time and attention if you bother to listen to all of this. And I'll come up with something a little bit more, let's say, a little bit less serious the next time around. Thanks, and bye for now.